We're interviewing Bobbi Carmitchell, and I'm going to let Bobbi ask you to talk about some of your background, where you were born, give them your name,
Okay.
that sort of thing.
I was born about 6 miles from here in Willow Street, Pennsylvania, small town south of Lancaster. You're yanking on my microphone. Things
sorry.
are not getting off to a great start. She's pushing me out of the frame already because it's all about Mary. I'm 55 years old. I'm the youngest of two girls in my family. Parents were, but they're both gone now, but both my parents have been always very supportive of me, whether at the time I was an out lesbian or I just had crushes on all my school teachers, and was never an issue at that point of being younger. And I have been, with the exception of a couple of years in like late teens, always living around this area. How much do you want me to go into?
Just keep going a little bit.
Let's see. I live now in Washington Borough, which is a very small rural community outside of Millersville, a medium-sized rural community. I've been here for about 22 years in this place, and I make my living doing a variety of things, but at most of the majority of my life I was a full-time musician. And now I'm just kind of a full-time artist. So there's a wider umbrella, which thank God we have, because it's raining here during the interview. My older sister is also, she's a year and a half older than I am. Her name's Ann, school teacher, just retired. She's straight, but is the best ally anyone could possibly ask for, and plays with me and performs with me for the last 25 years.
Okay. You went to school in this area?
Went to school in Lampeter, Strasburg, another small farm school, about 150 graduating class. Mm-hmm. General education, did not go to college, started with music right out of high school, and continued to do that up until about the last 4 years full time, and now I'm just still playing and will never stop.
Okay.
Yep.
How about church background? Any?
Interesting. My parents both were very steeped in their individual churches. My mom's family was raised Presbyterian in Lancaster. So her father was the church organist. She, at the time of her death, was the oldest member of the church for 86 years. Mm-hmm. So that's where there was a Wisner pew. That was like my mother's maiden name. So there was a pew there that's where you always sat. Same with my dad, raised in Lancaster. There was a Carmitchell pew, raised Methodist. So depending on who won the flip of the coin, or who was in the better, who didn't act out that much for that weekend, that depending on what church we went to. Mm-hmm. So like, well, we're going to be Methodist this week, and then we go to the Methodist church. Nope, now we're going to be Presbyterians, and we go to the Presbyterian church. But most of the time, I would say the majority of the time, we were at the Presbyterian church. And that was always a very interesting time period as a young lesbian in the 70s, because for me, I really started to identify myself with being a lesbian in high school. I just wasn't able to word it as easily, but and I think the Presbyterian church now is doing a whole lot more than the Methodist church as far as inclusivity of out lesbians. They just recently passed something, I think, that they're allowing lesbians and gays to be pastors, I do believe. Okay. I think they changed a big, huge policy right before my mom died. But I will tell you something that was a huge thing that happened with my mother, church-wise. Probably when I was in my early 40s, I'm 53 now, so my early 40s, maybe mid-40s, 10, 15 years ago, the minister that they had at my mom's church, great guy, and his daughter was pregnant for the first time, and in his sermons, he would say, okay, I'm going to be a granddad soon, so get ready. I'm going to be telling, incorporating stories about my daughter's pregnancy. It's my first, time being a granddad, so I'm really excited. So he kind of just kept you going all the way through. Then the daughter had the baby. Everybody's happy. The whole congregation's extremely happy. And he invites everybody one of the Sundays to the christening of the baby. So we're sitting in the front, in our front pew, in a balcony, and out comes the daughter with the baby, and out comes her partner. And you could have heard a pin drop. And my mom had a really hard time with that. And for the first time in my life with her as an adult, I'm like, why are you having a hard time with that? And it really set this big dividing place between the congregation. Some of the congregation felt that the minister led the congregation on, that he should have said, oh, by the way, my daughter's a lesbian. But in his mind, it was his daughter. There wasn't another identity that went with it. It was his granddaughter and his daughter. So it really, it set a bit of a precedent for that particular church, and a lot of people left. And to have my mom, when I questioned her, it was an interesting turning point for us, where I had to she said, I don't go to church to have the problems of the world rubbed in my face. I go there to escape it. And I'm like, hello. That's like, that you're talking about me. She's like, no, it's different. I'm like, no, it's pretty much the same. So, but I find that now the churches, that was, like I said, 15 years ago, and I think that they've made a lot of leaps in that category. But and the minister stayed on for years, and he was very well respected and well loved. But it was a huge issue for a while, and especially with my mom and I didn't see that one coming.
Did it change your relationship at all with your mom?
Not necessarily from my mom's standpoint. It made me a little gun-shy about talking about some things, but and my sister and I still talk about it. And if my mom were still here, she would, I think she would think that I overreacted. But that's a pretty strong thing for me to have heard from my mom, who was my biggest fan. Yeah. It's like you want your mom to be your biggest fan, and you want them to just love you unconditionally. And my mother, I can't, with that one issue, besides that one issue and that one thing, I can't think of a better mother to have, because she came to every job she could possibly come to. She played at every benefit she could possibly attend with me. She was a piano player, and she supported everything that I did. It was just, I found it threw me off that was the one thing that she was, I thought, the most supportive of her. And she still was up till the time that she died, because she was really proud of me. But I think for some reason she associated that time in her church as not wanting things to change in her life. And so yes and no. For a while, it kind of was a little stingy for me, but I think I was able to work past it. Okay. Yeah.
Well, it opens kind of an interesting area, is looking at the area of change. You've lived in Lancaster County all your life, and certainly you've seen lesbian and gay people and the whole issue kind of evolve here. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think for me as a performer, I've been a musician here in Lancaster since 1980, and I think that's probably, I think it feels to me that my identity in this community, in the Tri-City community, but especially in Lancaster, is, oh, there's the lesbian singer. She's really nice. And there's a parameter that I feel that it's a fine line to balance. I want to be able to work in my hometown. I want to be able to play music and have people come and support me. I also understand my leash that I'm on, so to speak, metaphorically, of how far I can go over a line that would make some bar owners who are in a straight bar feel uncomfortable. And at the same time, I want to be able to have the women who come in to support me, lesbians, straight women, allies, to be able to come in and support me and have them feel that they're comfortable and they're appreciated, that their money's good there at the bar, or their money's good there at the restaurant or wherever it is. And that's always, I always find that to be a very fine line and a very fine balancing act. And sometimes I feel that I've seen it change a lot over the last, I've been playing now for 30, I still play Lancaster Dispensing Company. I've been playing that since 1980. So that is, what is that, 11 years that I've been playing there? Just tell me that, because I don't want to be that old. Right? It's like decades. And to be able to see, and it's an interesting perspective when you're on the stage. If you're lucky, you're a little raised above people, so you don't feel like you're quite ganged up on as much, but you can see, you have the total view of everything that's going on. What you see is, and it's changing, but it's still not, we're still not over the hump of, and it's mostly straight women, when there's a bar that I'm playing, whether I played with Wind and Wood, or whether I play with my sister, or whether I play on my own, where there's majority of the people who are there are lesbians. They have their own way of trying to figure out how to be in a straight bar. Whether they just want to be, right out there, whether they want to just, however they decide they want to do it. But that impacts on everybody around them. And so you see people start to figure out by kind of going, oh, they're looking around, they're having a drink, they're having a sandwich, they take a bite of the sandwich, they're like, oh, they're all women at that table, and then they all start to figure it out, and it gives me a chance to be able to see how the straight world reacts to the merging of the lesbian world. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. There's always alcohol involved. That plays a part in it, because in my workplace, I'm the only person working. I don't have coworkers who have a certain standard, a certain professional standard to adhere to. I'm the only person who's working in a room full of 150 people. So therefore, I have to kind of go, okay, so the table over there, they've now figured out that these are all dykes over here, and what are they going to do about it? Are they starting to, I've had guys put condoms on my guitar when I've taken a break because they figured out that I'm a lesbian and they think it's really funny. And at what point do I decide that I'm going to laugh it off, or I'm just going to say, okay, is this a teachable moment? Is this a trainable moment? No, they're drunk. They're not going to get it. Do you learn by example? Blah, 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 all that stuff that you can kind of figure in. So I think it's always been, it's a constant. If I'm a teacher, that's one thing. If I work at a deli, if I clean streets, if I am a nurse, all those professions have their own parameters. But being in the public and performing for people who are off work it's not a challenge. It's what I've grown up doing, but it's always a study in human nature. And there are times that I go into going, you're walking into this environment, these are the parameters in that environment, so why do you think you want to go in there and start to get a little snooty because there's straight people who are going, oh my God, there are lesbians over here, or there are gay men over here. So it's always it's always an interesting challenge for me to figure out how to work through that. I think starting with Wind and Wood the way that I did, which was a band in 1980, I was living in Virginia for 2 years, maybe 3 years, up on Skyline Drive, which is a really beautiful, secluded place. And I totally fell into playing music for a living by accident. I went down there, met some friends, didn't even know where I was going. I mean, literally, I had, like, my whole profession just, I was going to Florida, going to Florida, stayed in a hotel in Washington, D.C., got a late start, I was 17. I was checking out of the hotel, and somebody opens the door, and this brochure blows off the rack on the wall, and it goes right in front of me. I'm like, where is that? And it was Skyline Drive. And so I diverted, never made it to Florida, drove to Skyline Drive, which is about an hour from D.C. Met some friends who were like, you should come live here. I'm like, okay, you're 17. drove up, packed my stuff. My parents were like, have fun. And I ended up playing down there for 3 years and kind of, getting my chops. And then I moved back home when I'm 21, and I meet Ann Billmeyer and Deanie Hamaker, two women who had been playing in college at Millersville. They were playing in Harrisburg. I get back from this trip across the country with a friend of mine. If you're lucky, you all get a chance to do that with your best friend. Like, you're 21, you're stupid, you're not prepared, and you load your car and you drive across the country. And, if you manage to escape death, you come back and you have all these great stories. So I had just gotten back into town, and my friends were like, let's go hear these guys play. So I went up, and I'm like, oh my God, an out lesbian. And Ann Billmeyer was the first out lesbian I'd ever met. And she was out there. She didn't change her pronouns of the songs. She stayed with singing a love song for a woman. She didn't sing it about a man, and everybody's kind of going, what? And it was an absolutely amazing experience to have met them exactly when I met them.
And what year was that in?
1980.
80, okay.
So I get up, and I recognized Dan from a baseball game somewhere, because, stereotypically we all played some sport. And started playing with them immediately, like the next week. And so for me as a young lesbian who kind of came to terms with my sexuality literally on top of a mountain in the middle of nowhere with one of my best friends who recognized that I was a lesbian and was trying to help me out by getting me the Ruby Fruit Jungle book by Rita Mae Brown. I'm like, oh...
Oh, I get
okay, thanks a lot, So I come back, to the big city of Lancaster, of Willow Street, going, right, I'm a dyke. Oh, this makes sense, what do I do with it? So then I meet Ann and Deanie, and I'm, still trying to figure out my sexuality and my identity. And it was the perfect storm of culture, the timing. The women's movement had picked up all the steam in the 70s. We're in another decade. Most of the places that we played were in Harrisburg for a while. Harrisburg was a lot more progressive back then. Steve Reed was just coming into being a mayor. That made a big difference. I cannot imagine us playing at the Midtown Tavern if Linda Thompson were the mayor. She would squelch it as quickly as she possibly could, and that's just across the board, I think, the way it is. So all these factors combine to make this perfect pot of acceptance. And Deanie, the flute player that I played with, was a straight woman. So we had, one big out lesbian, we had one big out straight woman, and we had me just kind of staring at the floor playing bass going, I think I'm a lesbian, I think I'm a lesbian, And so all of my friends, we're all in our 20s, and we all just grew up together. And all of that first 5-year period of sitting there, we played 5 nights a week because we were in our 20s. You had the energy to do that. And we'd play everywhere, and you would sit, and you look out, and there's straight women with their boyfriends, and there's no other table, so the 2 gay guys are sitting with them that never met. Lesbians are over here sitting with, it was like this total, it's like a UN of culture. Of who was sitting with who, it didn't matter. It was like they were there for the music, and that was the common denominator. And so everybody, just grew up with each other in total acceptance. And I think to have that be my first 5 years as being a professional musician was just the best thing in the world. Yeah.
Was Midtown a gay bar at that time?
No. Okay. No, the only gay bar that were...
Harrisburg.
Midtown Tavern was on 2nd Street, owned by these 2 very scary Greek people. Angie, little woman, very scary. They always sent me in to get money, and I never came out with it because I was always afraid of her. But the Hideout, I think in the early, mid-'80s, Rosie O'Donnell was a friend of ours. She was a friend of one of Ann's girlfriends at the time, went to college with Rosie. And she was just still doing the bars. And so she's like, I want to pick up some place in Harrisburg. Well, we're playing at this gay bar it was right next to the police station.
Okay.
And it was it really was a hideout, a hideaway or the hideout or something. It was right.
I'm thinking hideaway, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I forget where, some,
And in
divey little
Lancaster more
bar.
than Harrisburg.
Yeah, okay. And so we, Rosie did an opening for us, and we played with her somewhere, and she was not out at all at the time, even though everyone's like, well, you're not out, but you are. But anyway, so that's kind of, I don't think there was one bar in York called Jenny's that we played. That was kind of on the west side of York. The D-Gem was in Harrisburg on Front Street, up almost towards Fort Hunter. And that was a wild bar, crazy wild bar. Dottie owned a bar. And then there was a place right on, maybe on 2nd Street. It was a really small men's bar. And we played there a couple times. I mean, there was no place to set up, so we stood on the counter up on the bar and leaned up against. It's like you couldn't lean forward, or else your center of balance would be off because you're holding an instrument, and of course the breasts don't help, so you're like, whoa. So you'd almost like pin your shirts back against the wall. And it was an amazing time period. In that first 5-year period, we met Maureen Reagan, who was doing an arthritis telethon, and we never hid any of that, of our, who we were. And she invited us down to play for her dad in '84, I think. And we did. We went down and played, which was a huge, not necessarily that he was President Reagan and he was the big freaking Republican, but it was a Susan B. Anthony celebration. So we're like, yeah, let's do this. So that was good stuff, to have the small town band go down, and so I think that's what I think, having the Wind and Wood experience. I got to tell you, we busted through a lot of barriers. We would we'd bring our gear down, and we would set up, and there'd be guys at these divey little bars that we would play. We played a place called the Trevorton Shaft up in the coal mining region. And we would we'd be like, well, this could be the night that we get beat up. One of these nights we're going to get beat up. We carry your gear in, and all these guys are like, you guys carrying your gear in for your husbands? And we're like, A, we're lesbians. B, her husband never comes to hear us play. Oh. It's like they asked a question and you just put it right at them. And that was gutsy. You're in your 20s, you're a little more brazen. You're like, you're going to ask, I'll tell you. By the end of the night, they're swinging their beer mugs, buying us drinks, and carrying the gear out for us because they loved us, And so I think because we didn't necessarily politicize it, we just were who we were. By example, maybe helped a little bit, and we were really good. That didn't hurt either. And Anne was the best there was at including everybody, not making anybody feel left out. And I think that had a lot to do with our success. The combination was just there.
It's quite a training ground. Everybody comes to a position, I think, of deciding how they're going to be out. Did that stay pretty consistent then for you, you learned from that to say, just put it out there? And
yeah, I remember some of the early Pride festivals. Ski Round Top, I think, was the first one. Does that ring a bell? And I don't know how they got it at Ski Round Top. I don't know if they knew somebody there. I knew we did some stuff at Marcia Davis's. Hi, Marcia. She'd be a good person to interview if you haven't interviewed her. You have these. Every community has these kind of power lesbians. Either they're in a couple, or their profession. They're most of the time in business for themselves. So the rules are different. In the 80s, and there's still a little bit of it now, but in the 80s and the early 90s, the Guilt by Association ran rampant. School teachers, nurses, they would never come hear me. Very few would come hear me play in an out situation. They were very, very careful where they went. to come and hear me play. If I did a private function, everybody was there. And, and that was another thing, is to try to figure out how to safely be able to play music so everybody can come hear you. But I think when you have somebody who is in a position where they either have land and they have money to be able to finance, I think they tend to be able to, I think that was kind of the impetus for the Pride Festival at Ski Round Top. I'm not sure who even financed it, because back then,
I can't remember either.
yeah,
It was
because
just about
we're
when I
not
got
as
here.
young as we used to be, Mary. My God, I gotta take my
Can't
pill.
remember. Do we want to take a break for a minute? How are you doing?
I'm fine.
You okay? All right. All right, so what we were talking about was just how you learn to be comfortable with who you are, or how you're going to put that out, or how you're going to move around, as you mentioned, depending on the profession. And you said that earlier, too. Depending on the profession, you may have to operate differently than
Absolutely.
others.
In 1995, my father passed away in the 1994-95, in that time period. The second, like a month or so after he had passed away, I had jobs lined up, and I was full-time music at that point. Up till about 5 years, I was full-time. 5 years ago, I had been full-time music since '80. So my sister came with me to a place in Lancaster to play out of support for me. We were not playing as a duo at that point. And we were playing downtown, and it was a really good crowd, and everybody's, having a good time, straight people intermixed with lesbians who were kind of hidden at that point. And somebody had asked me to play a song called Birth Control and Beer. It is a beer mug swinging song by a group called Two Nice Girls. They are a very political queer band out of Austin, Texas at the time. And it is a very funny song, and it takes the sexual orientation and flips it on its ear. It talks about a woman who was a lesbian, her family was proud of her, but then she met a man, and her family's like, okay, we're all right with this. And so the whole song is this like great way of getting people to understand what it's like on the other side of the coin. Very funny chorus. Everybody swings their beer mug by the end of the song. So somebody asked us to play the song, and my sister's like, it's a little racy. It's not like your basic, straight bar songs. They're like, no, play it. So we play the song. Everybody swinging their beer mugs, great night. People standing up, buying alcohol, doing what our job is as singers, which is to make people drink and have them stay there. And they had a blast. The next day, my sister gets a phone call from her superintendent at her school district, from the bar owner, who I have still to this day never met. I usually deal with the bar managers. Here are your dates. Can you play this? Here's your money. Great night. Thanks a lot. You brought a good crowd in. I like your people. I always love that. I'm like the lesbian Moses. I'm like, okay, so everybody got along. Here's your money. Thanks a lot. One person who was there was a little offended by that song, a little uncomfortable. The kind of like straight woman who looks like she has spit up in her mouth. Like, they don't, so she was never going to have a good time. She calls the bar guy. All he would have had to have done is call me and say, can you not do that song? Hey, by the way, here's my name, which we can't use his name. We had somebody, can you not do that? I'm like, sure, no problem. You still want me to do the jobs? Yeah. Just watch that one song. That's fine. But what he does is he gets his facts wrong. He hears that my sister said something about being a school teacher. In the lyric of the song, my family, they were proud of me and proud of what I am. He jumps to every wrong conclusion in the book, calls my sister's school superintendent and says, do you have a teacher named Bobbi Carmitchell there? They say yes. Shock of shocks, all of a sudden I'm a school teacher. And so this guy basically called my sister's boss to say, I think you need to know that you have an out lesbian working there who stood up in a bar, at my bar, last night and sang this song. And I'm going to decide what you want to do about it. Conversation's over. Superintendent calls the principal. Principal comes to see my sister, knocks on the door. Now keep in mind, Her father had just died. In a really very short amount of time, 3 weeks died. And at that point you want to, he never made it out of the hospital. So you find yourself wanting to pin somebody against a wall. Not intentionally, but metaphorically because there's a lot of stuff going on. And again, another perfect storm scenario where the principal goes to Anne and said, you got to know that first of all, I'm not going to do anything about it. I don't care if you are. I know you're not because I've met your husband. But here's what happened, and we're not going to do anything about it. And Anne's like, I want to know who this was. Well, it doesn't matter. What do you mean it doesn't matter? You know I'm not a lesbian. If I were a lesbian, you couldn't do anything about it. However, how do I know that this will not at some point creep up into, if there's a department head position available?
Sure. Yeah.
Oh, her sister is that big old dyke down in Lancaster and sings all those beer swinging lesbian songs. That's not good for, There's a lot of speculation that goes along with that accusation. I want to know who the person is. So he tells my sister the name. She, of course, picks up the phone and calls me, and we're like, I said, you know what, there was a friend of mine who was an attorney there that night. Let me give him a call and see what kind of action we can take against this guy. So Jeff gets on the phone. He's like, there was never any conversation like that. I'm like, you're right. So what can we do? So these guys took on this case for free, and we sued this man and it's a very tricky thing of what to sue. We were not suing him saying being a lesbian is a bad thing. We were suing for his intent of what he was trying to do with that information. Yeah. And what followed was months and months and months of harassment from this guy of what he was threatening to do. And the attorney said, if you guys decide you want to go ahead and have a trial, I need to contact everybody that I've been with because it's going to come up, and you have to decide whether you want to pursue it or not. Now, back in '94, the list wasn't quite as long as it is now. So I could pretty much count on the two hands, and I was able to go back and go, right. So I was ready to do it, and we were ready to actually go to trial. And he blinked, basically, because he did not want the bad press. Yeah. That's a lot of effort for one stupid song, and in one, arguably really good song. It's like, what do you want to do? What's the mission of the performer? Is to get people to support the music, buy drinks, come back, have a good time, and I met all that criteria. But again, it's that, boy, all it takes is one phone call. And this was the 90s. This was the mid 90s. Not that long ago, you guys. In Lancaster. And for me to be able to, we got $10,000. That's a victory. Even if it was $50, I would have bought a nice fishing rod or something. But it's the principle of it. But the problem that also, the backlash for me was that I didn't work in Lancaster for a long time after that.
Really?
Dispensing company kept me going there all the time. But I was traveling around the country a lot, touring with other musicians, touring on my own. And I didn't realize how much that lawsuit, even though we could not, there's a gag order, and we're not allowed to discuss the guy's name, even though I would so love to say his name. But, we have to stick to what it is. But the same way for my sister, who you don't know what kind of backlash would have happened if a department head position would have come up. It's a small town, you guys. Word gets around that, and it was probably well into 2000 that I felt like things kind of changed a little bit. And I was able to play in town a little bit more.
Oh, okay. So that's what it was.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that there is, again, it depends on your profession. This is the only thing I can talk about is, and I think it gets better. I think in the Tri-City area, there are bars that, it's like any business, the life expectancy of the bars change, the venues change, who's running acoustic music, all that changes. Excuse me, you're going to love all these belches, aren't you, Michelle? So I find it really a fascinating study to see how, you know, to see what people tolerate and what they don't tolerate, and
where
how
they draw their lines,
and where they draw their lines,
and who they draw them on.
Yeah. And now I play at Chestnut Hill Cafe the last Sunday of each month, run by two great women. The mayor supports them, was like right there in the front lines when they cut the ribbon a couple of years ago, maybe 5 years ago. And again, it's almost like it almost feels like I'm back in the 80s, where it's a totally mixed crowd. I get 60, 70 people in there in that really small cafe. There's, you know, the married couples over there who just came from church, and they're sitting with a couple of my lesbian friends who don't have a chair, and everybody shares. There's somebody's baby over there, and somebody's, you know, there's straight guys, there's gay guys, and that's a really great safe zone for a lot of people. And you know, you just want, obviously you want more of those, but there are pockets of it out and about.
It's interesting that you talked about the issue at the bar in the mid-'90s, which in Lancaster was a lot of politics in that 90 to 95 period, I guess it was.
Yep.
And so do you think Lancaster itself, in talking about some of the political changes that have gone on here, did it start out as being more open, it sounds like, or more, I don't know, supportive or less?
Lancaster, again, it's in pockets, but I don't think Lancaster, I think Lancaster now is a whole lot better than it was. I don't really, when Wind and Wood played at Dispensing Company in the 80s, it was a safe place for a lot of people to come. I don't know if we would have played in other places in Lancaster at that point, if it would have been different, if it would have been the same. It's kind of like you get your home bar and your kind of hometown bar, and you're kind of safe in that little spot. I think Harrisburg had that advantage of being the state capital. A lot of influx of totally different people and different demographics. It's entirely different. Lancaster, when you see someone who's familiar, or you think they're kind of familiar, the question that we tend to ask people is, where did you go to school? The assumption is you went to school somewhere around here. You know, I don't see that being asked in Harrisburg, and I certainly don't see it when I'm out in different parts of the country, because I think, so Lancaster is a little bit more, you know, the assumption is everybody knows everybody from somewhere, because you all grew up here, because there's no outsiders. Good God. You know, and I think that's like steeped in tradition. This is the way we've always done it, and that's changing a little bit, but I don't think I mean, to have a Pride Festival in Lancaster is monumental. Monumental. But boy, the hoops that everybody had to jump through to get that. And I think that's a huge thing, and that's something that I try to support. And here's a kind of a sticking point that I have, if I could kind of do this. I think musicians on the whole get way more phone calls and way more assumptions that we will donate our time if it's a worthy cause. That's across the board. It doesn't matter if you're, I don't know, I can't speak for the straight population, but that's, you know, it's like, you're a feminist, hey, play for this fledgling nonprofit because you believe in it, so therefore these are your beliefs, so therefore you need to donate your time. Okay, yes, I'll do that. Okay, well, here's this, and here's this, and it's for spaying and neutering your dogs, it's for abortion rights, it's for preserving Nature Conservancy, right, got that. It's for gay and lesbian, right, got that, you know. And after a while, if you find yourself using all your weekends to donate your time, when it's your job that this is my money, you have to be a little more specific about what you decide you want to put your name to. That being said, when I ran into a bit of a snag with a couple of these youngsters who were doing the Pride Festival a couple years ago, because in Lancaster, I can't even begin to tell you how many Pride Festivals I have done and Pride Festival benefits for absolutely nothing. I think after a while, and I think it's a way that the community views musicians, well, come on, you know, we're doing a fundraiser and we need money. And okay, well then I'll be there and I'll help raise the money for the festival, and you raise thousands of dollars, and then what happens, they pull all the, they ask all the local performers. There's the stigma of being called a local performer, first of all. They pull the local performers to do the benefits, raise the money, and then hire people from outside the area to come in for the Pride festivals, and put the local performers who raise the money on the little teeny, flexible stage off to the side that you have to watch where you're standing so that you don't get the microphone hit you in the mouth because you're standing on the wrong platform. That's okay for a couple of times. But what happened at Lancaster Pride was I paid my dues. I don't feel like I need to have a badge for that, or but I did the first two for nothing. The third one, we had somebody who paid us because we thought that it was part of the committee, when in fact it wasn't. It was an individual. So we came back the next year and they're like, we're not paying their performers. And I'm like, you guys, even if it's just an honorarium, the performers are who people are coming to see. And yes, it's great that everybody volunteers, and you have somebody who's picking up the trash and they're a volunteer, and you have a volunteer who's, emceeing, or you have a volunteer who's whatever, but the people who are coming to the festival, generally speaking, are going to come to see the performers, whether they're, and the gay and lesbian issue, it's like, well, the drag queens don't get paid for it. I'm like, okay, that's fine, but now you're talking two different cultures. Now you're talking men's culture, women's culture. Whether they're gays or lesbians or straight people, it's two entirely different cultures.
And paid or non-paid.
Absolutely, yeah. So I forget who this guy was, and he just could not possibly understand why I would not donate my time. And I'm like, why don't you come and talk to me, and let me just kind of give you a little bit of background. I was doing benefits probably before you were in the womb. So don't sit here and talk to me about the fact that I'm not supporting my community, you little pissant. and eventually, and I wasn't trying to make it a big political deal. I was just like, you know what? This is what I'm going to sit out, you guys. I wish you luck. Go ahead and do it. And somehow something got started, and I'm like, whoa, I didn't say that. I'm just saying I'm not going to support it because we're trying to, at some point you have to just go, here's my line, and I need to make a statement for myself. They are now paying us $50, not for the band, but $50 per, not for individual, but $50 for the band. And it's like, and if I didn't, here comes my cat into the frame. And if I did not accept that, then that would have been really bad press for me, and that would not have been a way to get, it's like, yes, okay, that's what we've been talking about. Thank you very much. That's a big, huge start. And I know it costs a lot of money to put a festival on because I do it. So don't tell me I don't know what I'm doing. So yes, I will do that for $50. And that's why I was there this year. And
it raises, though, a dynamic, I think, in community, in the LGBT community, always small communities, especially around like Lancaster, as you say, we've got kind of an idea of who we are, and we see ourselves as located by what schools and all that kind of thing. But there is a point where there's tension in the communities. Do you see that?
Yeah.
And cohesiveness on the other side, too.
Yes. Yeah. Before, and any special interest group, I don't care what it is, any special interest, grassroots organization, we all get exhausted, you guys. You have these core groups of people who are out there and they believe what it is. If it's you're saving the whales or you're saving anything, there are people who are just there in the front line, and after a while they're just like, check please, I need to get out of here and take a break. And then you hope that more people come in. He just wants to be in the shot. We started the shirt I have on, actually. What I was noticing was going on in Harrisburg at the Pride Festival, probably in the early 2000s. There are so many good women musicians around here. We were getting put on the baby stages. And again, it is who is on the board, who gets on the board for that particular year, whose vision it is of what the festival is. And if you're lucky, you get a nice cross section. You get some of the earthy, crunchy lesbians who want to see the guitar players and the songwriters, and you get the boys who love the drag shows, and drag shows bring in a shitload of money. I don't doubt that, because we lesbians, we tend to be a little tighter with our wallets. But so how do you come in and meet in the middle?
Yeah.
And what was happening was, each year I would play somewhere at the festival, and I would get a teeny little stage, and it is not about ego for me. It's about 5 or 6 of the other women musicians who are so good, who should be playing on the stage and don't even get the call. And it's like, okay, so what do I do about that as an individual? And so I got together with a couple of my buds, and it's like, you know what, let's do a women's music fest. A very dangerous line to set up. We did it in Harrisburg. In 2005, my friend Anne, Anne died in 85, and when she committed suicide in 85, there was thousands of people that were just walking around going, what the hell, what just happened here? I realized that was 20 years had gone by, and so I wanted to do something to honor her. So I called Steve Reed, and I called the guys from the Forum, who they're still buddies of ours from playing there years ago. And they gave me the Forum, you guys. They just gave me the building. The Harrisburg Symphony was supposed to rehearse that night. They had a performance on Sunday. They were supposed to rehearse on a Saturday, and Fuller, the guy who works there, he's like, they're never here. So he just crosses them off, and he's like, yeah, we'll do this for you because you're doing it for Anne, because she needs to be honored. Because 20 years later, there are women musicians and there are lesbians playing, and it's because of her. She made a huge difference. So we pull everybody in. People come. I guess like 800 people came in from all over the country. Lots of women who hadn't been in the area for a while came to support it. That kind of resurged a lot of people in Harrisburg going, oh my God, where are the women musicians around here? We don't see them at the riverfront parks. We don't see them at Capona. We don't see them anywhere. So I'm like, well, what do I do about it? So I got money from the city, from Parks and Rec, to do one. They wanted me to do a reunion concert that we did to kind of pull together every year. And I'm like, it's $1,500. I'm like, all right, well, that's a good chunk of money. But how about we think a little bigger? And why don't I just break it up and stretch it out to 9 hours? Not what I was thinking. And do 8 groups, and bring some of these women musicians in who are 15 minutes away from Harrisburg, who live right here, and give them some exposure. And so basically split up the pie, not just kind of say, yeah, it was a great band, and we each made a couple $100 and it was great. It's not about the money. It's not about the individual money. It's about kind of the bigger picture. So we did the Central Pennsylvania Women's Music Festival. And we did it at Reservoir Park for the first 4 years. Because we went through the Parks and Rec, it was, we had a couple of guidelines we had to follow. We could not charge money. We're like, that's fine. They gave us the sound, they gave us the lights. And so it was an 8-hour festival. We brought in women vendors. And the biggest question of anybody who did interviews, and I sat at Channel 27, and 33 is when I kind of spazzed out when I was doing an interview with the WITF guys, because it was like the 4th interview, and I'm like, and what people wanted us to say was it was a lesbian festival. It's like, it is a women's music festival. And they're like, why don't you have men there? What do you have against men? I'm like, oh my God, it's like they bait you, because that's their job. And they want one little line to say, producer of festival hates men. Wow, let's go see this festival. And I never gave them that. And it's like, you have blues festivals, so are you going to go to a blues festival promoter and say, what do you have against classical? So it was, and yet it was this stigma still, and we intentionally brought in Straight women, we had the Sweet Adelines come in. They had a freaking riot hanging out with the big old lesbians in the backstage.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't think they were going to have as much fun. It's like, yep, first of all, I always do great food.
Mm-hmm.
I always feed the performers and the staff well. So it's like we had this great mix of musicians, and we did it for 8 hours, and we did 4 of those in a row.
Mm-hmm.
And still in that particular time period, which wasn't that long ago, it was still hard to get people to show up at that festival.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're like, ooh, guilt by association. I went to a women's music festival. I could have called it the Central Pennsylvania Music Festival, and secretly, in my head went, I'm going to stack it with women musicians, and I'm not going to identify it as that.
Mm-hmm.
Never once. There's no lesbian anywhere. There's no word lesbian anywhere in here.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, and that's Harrisburg.
Mm-hmm.
That's supposed to be the better of the 3. And York, don't even get me started on York. I mean, that's a scary place.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, York.
Sometimes.
Yeah. So it's a continual process to reinvent how to promote music and how to play music in this area and
Mm-hmm.
not scare people away.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm still working at it. Yeah.
How's your battery doing?
Good.
You okay?
Yeah.
All right. Areas that you'd like to talk about in particular? Kind of talked a little bit about growing up and professional career, a little bit about Windenwood.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like that was a big influence.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think the other thing that was really, in that time period in the 80s, you had women like Lorraine Kajawa. Did you think about interviewing her?
Mm-mm.
Do you remember Lorraine? She lives in P-Town now. I'll give you her contact information. But, you had, in the time period of the, I guess we're not asking him enough specific questions.
Are we doing things right here?
So I have B, and I have flat, and I have minor. They're my 3 cats. And B just passed away, so now I just have a flat minor, which is what you get when you drop something.
This is?
Yeah. This is minor, yeah.
Well, minor's going to go to sleep here.
Yeah.
We like the head pets.
He loves it. But he will use his claws to be careful.
I was going to say,
yeah.
Does he bite at all? Or?
Oh, yeah, he will a little
Yeah, he
bit,
will
but
do
just
that
kind of
too.
like love you, hate you. Where were we?
We were talking about influences and...
I'll tell you what I see that's really a cool thing is that minor, seriously, hey, okay, all right. Should we take a commercial break and throw the
Okay.
cat outside? He'll be back anyway, but we'll be back after a word from our sponsor. I think what saves me from not, when I started traveling in the middle, after Ann died and the band stopped playing, and I became a solo artist. And I started then doing women's music festivals around the country. Mm-hmm. And I didn't look back. And then I probably toured up till about my dad died in the mid-90s, so I toured up till, 90s, even into 2000. I had a 3-month tour with Lucy Blue Tremblay. I don't know if you know her. And I think traveling and using this as my base has really kept me a little more sane than if I were to be here and never seeing what the real world is like. Not the real world. This is the real world that we live in. It's our reality. But I think, to be able to get in a plane and fly to Eugene, Oregon, and do their Pride Festival, and then be able to come back here and go, okay, here's what we can learn. Mm-hmm. Going to LA and singing with a women's chorus and going, oh my God, can we pull something like that off in Lancaster? Well, no, because the demographics are totally different. Mm-hmm. Look what you have in Los Angeles and any urban area versus a rural area. And I think my identity in my community of friends and my mom's friends, my mom just was my biggest fan, and my sister's biggest fan. Whether I was a musician or anything, she was like, it wouldn't have mattered what I was doing. That's, like I said earlier, But because that's what I did and still do, and my mom would play with me quite often, her community was so involved in what I do. I still get, okay, I still have her friends coming to hear me play at Chestnut Hill, and boy, is that exceptionally great. So my identity in this small town is that I'm the singer. I'm, I have this place, but it's a little more private. And I think I think whenever I do contract work, I do stained glass windows, all that. But it's like that's my main identity, and I'm fine with that. I like that. That's something that people know who I am and know what I do. I will tell you that when I get up to Seattle and I walk down the street, or I get to Bellingham, 90 miles north, and I walk down the street and I'm like, oh my God, there's a whole lot of me here. There's a whole lot. I'm not the only, I feel like I don't stand out as much as I used to in the 80s and the 90s in Lancaster. Because I think there's more of us, and I think it's becoming a little bit more, the visibility's helping. Whether that's something that I've had a chance to be a part of, I'm not sure, but it certainly is nice going to a bigger area to kind of go, wow, look at all of me over there, I'm over there, I'm over there, I'm over there, and I choose to live here because this is where I'm from, and I love the affordability of it, and I love the access to being able to take off and go to bigger areas, and still, I mean, this is in my blood. This is what I write about. I don't write about being a lesbian. I write about dirt and birds and farmers. It just so happens I'm a lesbian, so I don't necessarily write political music. And maybe that's part of what saves me from still being able to work here in this area.
So we were just spending a little bit of time talking about coming out experiences. Pick it up.
My father was an alcoholic, and before I chose to come out to him, he was trying to always figure out what my life choices were. So he would tend to go to the bars where I was playing the week before I would play there, or sometimes the night before that I would play there, and try to figure out, talk to bar owners, talk to people there, and try to figure it out himself. And then I'd get to the bar the next night, and the bartender would find it funny that my dad was there the night before. And it's like, that's your work, and it's so different. It's so totally different than most people's jobs, because that kind of behavior would not be tolerated in a normal workplace. But because, again, it's a bar, there's a lot more lenience, I think, for some people. They think that the rules are different. So as a young, I was in my 20s at that point, young lesbian, kind of going, oh my God, everybody knows that I'm a lesbian except my father, and I haven't decided to tell him. So I thought it was time for me to tell him. When he called me one evening and said that a bartender had decided to assumed that I had already come out to my dad, and he was there at a place in Lancaster that I used to play. And the bartender said, "Oh, you're Bobbi Carmitchell's dad. Oh my God, she is such a role model for other lesbians, and we just love, we love her." And he's like, "What?" And so I didn't have to come out to my dad. I came out. I was outed by a friendly bartender who called me and felt horrible, but I'm like, it was going to happen anyway. My mom, I had talked to her about it after my dad, and they both knew, so it wasn't a big issue for them. And it was pretty seamless. I think what was happening in my life with my dad at that time kind of took center stage. The behavior of him. And he was so proud of me. It was just a different relationship with my mom than it was with my dad. I mean, if he were still here, he'd be my biggest fan as well. But I think it was trying to figure it out. He was trying to digest it, and maybe had I gotten to him a little sooner. But our timing is the way it is, and things happen the way that they do. So that was kind of. But he would come to all my events. I have a video of a concert I did at the Forum, a breast cancer benefit. And I had all these great women musicians come in, and I said something about, I think my dad's out there, and I just heard him go, yo, you know, so it's like, you know, he'd be in the front row if he were still here. So he never backed down of his pride for me. So that was pretty cool.
Just talking a little bit more about coming out, you had mentioned a little while, as we began this actually, that coming out through high school, that you had an awareness.
Oh, fourth grade, Penny Nisley,
Oh.
bus patrolman.
Okay.
Actually, I'm going to go back. First grade. This is really freaky. First grade, her name was Miss Kegerice. I intentionally acted out so she would pick me up and put me in between the refrigerator and the wall and make me stand there and calm down. And I'm like, oh, Miss Kegerice is paying attention to me. So yeah, Miss Kegerice, and I had no doubt that, you know, I just, you know, you don't know how to identify where it's the 60s and the early 70s. You know, I think you were a little ahead of me, but it's that time period. Now what I find interesting is a friend of mine's daughter who is 19, who is a lesbian. Daughter's a lesbian, mother's a lesbian. We were having a conversation the other day, and she said, you know, my daughter doesn't feel like she has to come out because then it becomes an issue. Because it shouldn't make any difference. And I'm like, whoa, you talk about flipping something on its ear. It's one generation later, going, oh yeah, to her it's not even an issue. It's becoming non-political. I mean, everything that's going on with the Supreme Court, obviously, and I think that's mostly our generation of lesbians and gay men going, this is what we want. But you know, the
next generation coming up.
I would have never looked at that from that perspective of going, it's a non-issue. Me being a lesbian is a non-issue. It's who I am. It's so ingrained in their identity. I think we're all kind of going, yeah, but we still know that it's still out there and it still needs to be worked on, because let's just flip through television, which is why one of the reasons I don't have a television that's connected to the outside world. But you know, let's see what positive role models there are on television for out lesbians. Let's keep looking. Let's keep looking. Let's keep looking. You know, movies. Let's keep looking. Well, one or two every once in a while crosses over your table, and that's great. But you know, from that perspective, we are so in the baby infant steps. But it's a whole lot better than it was before.
Okay. So it's been a big change.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I think that it's also, and it's so funny for myself to be sitting here and saying that I've been, you know, I have now 30 years of this under my belt, to think that there are young lesbians who are looking at maybe something that I've had a chance to do, to go, wow, you know, if she did it, you know, it's not that hard. Or I remember this, or, you know, to be a part of that, if I could influence anybody, have influenced or continued to. I have guitar students who are fabulous guitar students. They're just like young women, and they are light years ahead of where I was as a, first of all, just as a woman guitar player, because there's so many more of us out there now. You know, I had Joni Mitchell and I had Judy Collins. That was it. You know, now they're everywhere, and they weren't even lesbians, for God's sakes. You know, then here comes Olivia Records. Have anybody talked about Olivia Records and all of that? And
haven't.
Olivia Records, you know, in the 70s, you have these women who are, again, they're all, you know, riding the same wave of feminism and lesbianism and, you know, women's rights, whether they're straight or lesbian. And you have these women who are meeting each other and they're going, oh my God, let's do women-identified music. And at that point, it was political, and they wanted to record it. And the men owned all the equipment. They had all the balls. They had, well, balls literally. They had everything, and they're like, why would we want to rent and give you space to do this? So a handful of women, Judy DeGoulage, Therese Trull, Meg Christian, Holly Near, who was still not sure whether she's lesbian or not, and that's fine. You know, all the Margie Adams, Chris Williamson, they're like, well, guess what? We're just going to figure it out. So they rent, they buy, used equipment, pieces of crap, and they figure out how to do it. Karen Kane. And they're like, we're just going to make our own record label. We will just make our own Sandlot. And they start putting out music, Lesbian Concentrate, Pivotal Records, Changer in the Change, Chris Williamson, first women's record to sell 1 million copies. And how long did that take? But it got done. And then, so they just started this women's music, and it was political because it had to be back then, because nobody was doing it. And now, so you, as a women artist, as a woman musician, Olivia is the crown jewel as bugs fly in my ear. And I, of course, don't care, because I'm an earthy, crunchy lesbian. And that was like that's the top of the line, if you're lucky to be able to get associated with them.
Were you involved in any of the work, Chris and Holly and all that? We used to go to the basements in Washington, D.C. and sit and listen to the music there when they were recording.
And what was the time period of that?
It was mid-70s.
Mid-70s, yeah. It's you listen to these recordings, and they're so primitive, but it's like, they were analog recorded. It was, you knew that you were part of something that was going to hopefully set the world on its ear.
And they did.
Yeah.
They did in many ways.
Yeah. And now here's Olivia Records, who now does not, and we can talk for hours just on the subject of what is women's music. Spelled women with a Y, women with an I, women with an E, women, whatever. It's like, how do you identify what is women's music? Is it women identified music? Is it women? I remember I went to a women's music open mic at the DGEM years ago with a girlfriend of mine. And we're like, okay, let's go support this. And it was late 80s. Anne had just died, so, we're trying to get out there and support stuff. And we go there, and the woman who's hosting it says, okay, thanks for being here, part of our first women's music night at DGEM. And it's a freaking lesbian bar. It was a straight bar. And the first song that this woman sang was, I Don't Know How to Love Him by Jesus Christ Superstar. And I'm kicking Mary under the table going, what are we doing here? Is this women's music? Oh, well, it's a woman playing. And for her, that's her. And she was a lesbian. And it's like, I couldn't wrap my head around it. I'm like, if I just landed on some strange little planet. But it's women voicing their opinions. And is that women's music? Yes. Is it women's music to have a band called Tribe 8 at the Michigan Women's Music Festival to all have dildos on? Yes. Because they're expressing it. They cut their dildos off, they throw it out on the stage, or out into the audience, and yes, that's women's music, because it's self-expression. Somewhere in between is where most of us are, hopefully. So, but it's like you have the Olivia women, they ride this huge wave, they do Carnegie Hall, they do, it's like top of the line. Teresa Troll is still about the best women's, actually hands down, men or women producer of anybody that I've ever had a chance to hear. Farron, these really critical women. And I had a chance to rub elbows pretty much with all of them in the early 90s, and I'm telling you, it was a pretty amazing experience. And choosing to stay here and not relocate and not stay in that wave that I was in for a while, and that was good, but I would have sacrificed a lot. So I love where I am. I'm not saying that I was at their level, but I was hanging out with them. I was opening, I was doing dual sets with them, and it was a great experience. But I wouldn't trade this for anything. But now Olivia Records is Olivia Cruz's. So now all these women who don't necessarily need to be in a women's label, you have Melissa Etheridge, big, huge first person to come in and just go mainstream. She bypassed Olivia because Olivia served its purpose. It got people starting to think about it and talk about it and acclimate and kind of slowly move in and merge in, on the on-ramp to where mainstream is. And now they're doing cruises that they're out of this world. And a lot of the artists that we're playing in Carnegie Hall, and some of the smaller festivals and bigger festivals are now on the boats. It's like the Les boat, you know, and they're just floating all over the place and playing. So it's all, everything just continues to change in a good way.
Been a lot of things over the last 30 years.
And it's not that long ago.
No, it isn't.
It's like, wow, you know, we did these Hahn benefits. Remember Hahn? Hahn was Harrisburg area women's newspaper. And we would do the benefit concerts. Oh, that's right, because we were musicians and we're supposed to. But that was the kind of stuff you wanted to put your name onto. You know, these newspapers, they were just Holly Van Ness, Carolyn Cupo, Laurie Williams, who passed away. These are like dedicated women, and they, you know, it was, you'd get these publications, they'd get them mailed to your house, or, you know, your subscription was what, $5 a year, and it would have everything that was women identified on it, whether it was lesbian or not. It was just, it was feminist news. And then Lorraine Kajawa shoots off, and she does Lavender Letter. Oh my God, Lavender Letter, right? And that's
still around.
She's now in P-Town.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But
So
she would be a good
her
person.
too.
Yeah, you guys will have to do a road trip and see if you can get some kind of an expense account. Talk to Amy about it.
Okay.
Amy, give him a budget. You know, give him some travel time, and we'll all go up and we'll rent a sailboat. We'll go sailing. There it is. That's it.
I was wondering where Lorraine was,
Yeah,
because
she's
we want
in P-Town.
copies of the. We want copies. We're going to be looking for artifacts and things like
I
that.
got a ton of them. I have
'Cause
some old Hahn
Oh,
newspapers.
that would be
and
great.
oh
If you
yeah,
can find that stuff, Amy is going to eat it up, or Lana, one of them.
Yeah.
I know I just gave them my Olivia records to put in a collection
Nice.
because they had to be into.
yeah.
How about Women's Circle? Let's move that.
Women's Circle got started by Amy and I, Chris Fenwick, and Amy Shestak. The four of us were in I think it's the early stages, actually, it was the early stages of the Gay and Lesbian Center that was going on in Harrisburg that you guys are now a part of, way back in the day. There was a feasibility study. They got some money together just to see where the gays and lesbians were in the area. And so they did a survey. And I remember we were all sitting around the Pink Lizard, which is now something else. It's a bingo. Was it a bingo hall or something?
know.
Kind of lesbian bingo
I
or something.
forgot the name.
We were all sitting around looking at the survey. I mean, I use this as a prop. And we're like, and where is this? Doesn't apply to us. Next question, blah, blah, blah. Doesn't apply to us. It was mostly male questions. So evidently, again, you have one common denominator, is that they're both homosexuals. Oh, you're men and you're women, but that really makes a huge difference. And again, it's a totally cultural difference. It doesn't mean that we can't all get along and we can't all commingle and co-celebrate, but huge fundamental difference between how men and how women choose to celebrate and choose to be. So we were looking at this and we're going, where are the lesbian questions? Where child care questions? And it was like what do you want to see in a center? And there was nothing about, and I don't have any babies, I don't have any kids that I know of. It's like, I don't, so I'm not really into the baby thing, but a lot of my friends are, and it's like, where are the questions that pertain to health care and fundamental questions like that? So the four of us were like, we need to kind of reinvent this wheel. So I came back here to the house and drafted another survey and sent it out to my mailing list that I had, maybe 400 names. Made my little copies and put it out on my email list, and I had an actual physical mailing list back then where I'd send postcards out. I think I had like 800 names or something, and it's way before email. And I sent, here's what's going on. Here's this questionnaire, and can you guys fill this out to the women's community? We got 350 some back within a couple of months.
Wow.
It's like, whoa, okay, we have something. Yeah, so it's like the women's community just needed to be able to check a box, And so, boy, we put everything out and we collated it the best we could. We're like, okay, number 10, the question of number 10 is here, and this is a number here, and so we put all the data together, and we decided that a women's center, I mean, ever since Anne died, I think that I remember writing an article for Han saying that that was going to be one of the things that I really wanted to work on, was to have a place for women to go, young women to go, to realize that they're not alone. Whether it's their sexuality, whether it's their, their politics or whatever. So the idea was to think about doing a women's center. And as you guys know, that's a huge project. And the feasibility, it's like, it's not that there haven't been ideas to do that and people coming up with it, but how do you make it sustainable over the years, even if you decide to back out of it. I just realized I mowed my grass in my sneakers, and now it smells really stinky. So my shoes are stinky of grass. There you go. It's just like being here. I take them off, but it would make it worse. It would escape. Anyway, so I apologize for that. So we decided to obviously not do a women's center, but I don't know, we decided to call it Women's Circle. And to be able to, so we formed this group to be able to figure out, based on the results of the survey, what was rising to the top as what were the big issues. Most of the things that we had were, where do you meet other women? A lot of women were in recovery. A lot of women, back then smoking was still allowed in bars. A lot of women didn't smoke, don't want to go to smoky bars, don't want to meet women through church, don't want to meet women through a bookstore. Where do you meet them? So we decided to kind of gear it towards some of the top 4 or 5 of what we got back, and that was, it was social issues. How do you where do you hang out in a safe place? First of all, where do you find a safe place? The idea, and I still get calls from people saying, hey, my partner's turning 40, 50, 30. I want to rent out a place so we can have a party, and I want you to play. Where can we find a place that we're all safe and comfortable doing that? Good luck trying to find that. So they, they hopefully think that I would be able to help them out with that. And in some cases I do. There's some places that have kind of come up that you can use. But where do women meet other women? And we weren't setting up a dating site. It was just, where do you get together and talk about issues with like-minded women?
What year was this?
This was,
80?
Oh my God, this is the 2000s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this was 2002.
Okay.
Yeah, I had just come back from touring, and I was done. I had been on the road after 9/11. I booked this tour with Lucy Blue. We had 3 months. Our first job was Greenwich Village 2 weeks after the towers went down. And we had the tour booked, and you can't not do the tour. So for 3 months I was gone from here, and I think we hit every state but 2 or 3. All over we were in Canada. We were flying when they were taking the strings off our guitars because they thought they were possible weapons. So I was pretty much done with the road at that point. So I came back, and we set up this organization, and they were like, okay, how do we do this? We had, I don't know how many hundreds of people we had in our membership. It was like $10 to join. So it gave us a little seed money. We started to try to do monthly programs. We couldn't find a place to do it. It's like, all right, let's just focus on doing one weekend a year and do it well. So I found a camp that I went to as a kid, Camp Shand in Harrisburg, or in Lancaster County. It's through the YMCA, and I was really honest. I'm like, look, I want to do this. I want to do this retreat. It's a 3-day, and it's going to be women only. And they're like, great. It's in September. The camp, the kids are done. The summer camp is over. So it was this, the first year was, what we did was, again, we looked at the results from the survey. And we're like, okay, a lot of people, believe it or not, don't know how to do this. And so we picked a theme for each year. Peace and healing was right after the 9/11. We did warrior women one year. And we changed the names of the cabins and Amy was really good at that. Changed the name of the cabins to different, strong women, Artemis, blah, blah, blah. And what we did was we made the camp, the camp paid for itself by they didn't charge us a flat fee. They didn't say it's going to charge you $2,000 or $1,000 to rent the camp. They're like, for every person who comes in, you pay us $15. So we were able to then keep our costs down. And for $85 for the weekend, you were in Friday at noon and you stayed Sunday till noon, or Sunday for breakfast. And that was all your meals. We brought a cook in. A friend of ours was a cook. We bought all the food. And we did programs and workshops for that, mostly Saturday and into Sunday, based on the theme that we were doing for that particular year. Warrior Women was conflict mediation for one, how to change your oil, archery. I did a woodworking course for a lot of women. Believe it or not, there's some dykes who don't know how to use power tools. It was scary to know that. And so it was this, we had drumming, we had music in a very safe place at Camp Shand, and it was perfect, and it was going along. And we had a couple people who thought we should do a 501c3. That got a little complicated because, as you guys know, I mean, you have to do minutes. You have to you have to be keep really tight records. We ended up backing off of that and just making it this great little weekend once a year. What happened as a result was the transgendered issue came up for us. There was a transgendered person who was in the middle of transgendering from male to female, who was seeing a woman who used to come to our events, and they wanted to come, and it made us all just go, oh, okay, wait a minute, this is different. We need to identify what it means to be a woman. And boy, did it slammed on everybody's brakes. And for me, I guess I was the president or something because nobody else wanted to do it. It gave me it presented a huge challenge. Because I knew all the story. Here's what happened. I knew that a lot of the women who were coming to this particular year were very skitterish about the fact that they were going to be there at all. One woman in particular, 4 years, she kept saying she was going to come, and she never made it because she didn't have enough nerve. And she's like, I'm coming. She's married, and I'm going to try this, and I want to see what happens. I'm like, that's great. I'll put you in this cabin. It'll be a great cabin. So in comes the transgendered issue of staying overnight in a cabin as a man with all the plumbing, and how do I, in order for me to not infringe on that man's rights, I can't tell the other people who are their cabin mates who this person is. And I had a big problem with that. I personally did, because I guess there was a part of me that was like, this is a well-oiled machine now, and we have this, and I wanted to, so what we decided to do is we put it out to the whole, to everybody who were the members. We did 2 or 3 meetings. We brought transgender people in, and sat down, and it's like, how do you learn from this trans issue? There was a big dividing space in between. If you get into the question of you post-operative or you pre-op, and I can't imagine what it must feel like to be in the wrong body. I don't have a frame of reference for that. And I want to say that I would be the most compassionate person to try to understand how that would feel. That being said, if I wanted to, I offer to donate my time to be able to set up a mini retreat just for that specific thing, but not have it be a part of this right away until the members all had a chance to acclimate. And that was turned down. And that's fine. So at at our big meeting to decide, to have the board decide, we had to come up with how do you identify as being a woman, and who do we let into the women's circle based on that. And the deciding vote was, if you identify as being a woman, then we, as the women's circle board, would welcome you into the retreat. And that's a very big net. To have a man come in, a man, physical man, to question his identity in that particular setting, I had to vote against that. That was my, because I wanted it to be a safe place for a lot of, and I knew that we would lose these marginalized women who were just ready to just dip their toe right in it and go right into that and say, okay, this is, and not to say that it wouldn't at some point down the road work out, but there was a part of me that goes, if the transgender community gets into this, this will be the focus. The focus will shift. And I wasn't personally ready for that to happen. So I got voted out. And that was the decision that the Women's Circle, as the voting board, to say, whoever identifies as a woman. I said, no, a lumberjack can come right up to I mean, I went to the far extreme. Some lumberjack can walk up to the counter to come up to the registration, clearly looking like a man, and say, I think I'm a girl. Are you going to let me in? And they would say yes. And I'm like, okay, that's fine, but I'm not going to be a part of that. So I resigned as that. And that was the issue that set me kind of going, I wish you guys the best, but here's what you got to do. And here's what I have to do. And it's no longer going. And that's very sad. That's very sad. Because it did become, a lot of people didn't go as a result of it, and it's a missed opportunity for education, but it was force-fed. To me, it felt like it was force-fed for a lot of people, that they just wanted to be able to maybe invite them in for a workshop, which would have been a suggestion that I had brought up, but it was, get more power to them to say, look, it's all or nothing. We're either in or we're not. We don't want to come in as a workshop experience, and that's the way it happened. So I think it made it another 2 years, maybe 3 years, and now it's no longer. But Amy and I got honored from FAB, actually. We got, they asked us to accept awards for FAB 1 year, the Fall Achievements Benefit, with the work that we did with the Women's Circle. And, I pat myself on the back for that, and Amy too. And it was good work, and it's a shame it got politicized and it got bigger than it should have. And I'm not sure how it would happen. People say, can you do it again? And I'm like, you know what, I'm kind of here right now. It's a different spot for me. Doesn't say I don't have, more fight in me, and I'm just kind of sitting here, and I had a lot going on the last year with my mom, and I'll see where I want to put my energy at this point.
Let's segue into today. It's an important day in terms of the Supreme Court decision in both Perry as well as Windsor. Where do you see this community going now that we've kind of opened this whole door on gay marriage? So, talk about one of those things. We're still working on a couple of political action to get non-discrimination in employment in Pennsylvania, while parts of the country now are out there on marriage, and talk about different kinds of activities and agendas and stuff. Yeah,
you're exactly right. I mean, you gotta love Pennsylvania. We have like all the, the most roads in the state of all states. We have the most highways, but yet we just have a lot of one-way streets, don't we?
That's a good analogy.
I mean, it's just like people drive through us, but we can't get past ourselves sometimes. I don't know. I've had a chance to be in a lot of different parts of the country. I think I've played in every state but 3. The Dakotas. I'm still working on those. And I think, you learn a lot of seeing how festivals work and performance spaces work, and to be able to see who's doing what political work in that area. And I come back to Lancaster and I think, we still have so much to do. And Pennsylvania and Lancaster, two entirely different things, obviously, because you have Philly and Pittsburgh and Harrisburg, but you got good old Lancaster, and I don't know. I think that if any of the cities in this area are to do anything, I think Lancaster seems to be the one that's primed the most to be able to step out in the front. I think the way that it seems that I think Linda Thompson has so damaged Harrisburg. I think Steve Reed was such an amazing supporter of arts in general. And if you look at how society views its artists, whether it's the United States or whether you go back in time, or just go to a different country, now presently, I think that if we support our artists and value them, that's the barometer for me. And I think Lancaster seems to be really on the ball with that these days. I don't know.
Done very well with arts.
Yeah, I don't know. And arts, it covers a huge net. I had about a year ago, 2 years ago, the Tourist Bureau of Lancaster contacted me, and they said, there's this guy who's like the Tom Brokaw of France, who is he retired from being the nightly news guy, and he's taking 2 years, and he's traveling through the United States, and he wants to spend 2 weeks or 3 weeks in each state, and he wants to get to know the artists of the state, which is brilliant. You got to love France for that. And can they come and talk to you? I'm like, sure, that'd be really fun. And I look at, you gotta, France has its own, good points and bad points, but it's like, it makes you think, who in this country would go to another country, try to learn about what makes it tick and how the wheels work based on their artists. It's like, obviously, it's like, well, here's Gettysburg and here's this and here's Hershey, but let's not interview the CEO of Hershey, by the way, who's like kicking jobs out to Mexico. Let's find me some artists to talk to around here. And I love that concept. And I think when a society takes care of its artists and at least just pays attention and acknowledges it, and that's why I think Lancaster has a shot at being a little bit. I think Harrisburg is going to start licking its wounds after a while, depending on Linda Thompson. And did I see Dan Miller's thinking of he's putting his name in? Did he just bump her?
No, he got the write-in bill from the Republicans.
Okay.
So he's considering whether or not he's going to do it again.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah, take it any way we can get it.
What else do we need to cover here?
Anybody have any good recipes?
Recipes
Just
for?
kidding.
I want to just put us in context here around the room. This is a workshop?
This is a workshop. This
Getaway place?
Actually, you know what? When I resigned from the Women's Circle, I realized I've done a lot of events here in this area. I'm fortunate that I have landlords who just wave as they drive past and say, everything's great, thank you very much. I've been able to think about using this space as a mini retreat place. I used to do, back in the mid-90s, I would do Twilight concerts every summer. I'd do once a month, and I'd charge $15 or something, and I'd get 30 women, and they'd come here. I'd make a big, not here, but I'd make a big pot of ratatouille, because, God forbid, we don't eat meat. I still do, but we do a little pot of food and then walk up. I have a big fire circle. There's a path that I carved out, and so we do a little women's night, and I love that concept of it. I got away from doing that because I was traveling a lot, and then in 2009 I got injured at work. I had 1,000 pounds of drywall fall over on me and pin me against the wall and blew my knees out. So I had about 10 months to sit and ice my knees and receive all of my friends who I'd been always taking care of. They were coming to me, and I'm like, this is really difficult. But what I ended up doing was realizing some of the things that I was missing from the Women's Circle was having a space for creativity and for women to explore their creativity that most of them thought they didn't have. Like we all have some form or fashion of it. So I studied, I knew how to tear things apart. I was good at that, but I didn't know how to build. So I studied for about a year design, and I know it's not a big deal, but I put this whole thing together with a lot of my ex-girlfriends, which is I recommend that highly. Getting your ex-girlfriends together with hammers and really big nails and building walls as opposed to tearing them down. So what this place has been able to achieve in a very short time, I'm in my second year here, is I have classes here, and I can sit maybe 4 women, 5 women around this table and just provide them with a little primer. I do glass workshops and some building workshops, here's how you cut wood, so you don't cut your finger. But to be able to sit here and have women come in, one of my first students came in, and she had bought a class for her friend and for herself, but she clearly said, I'm doing this for my friend. I'm not creative. I'm like, that's fine, that's great. And so in the front, which you guys can't see in the home audience, I have all these sheets of glass. I had sheets of glass all over the place from my bins of glass leaning up against where the light could get to them. So there's probably 15 sheets of glass all over the place. And I set it up, and next thing I know, there's my friend who's not creative, picking up a piece of glass and turning it, and the pattern in the glass, she's like, oh, yes. That's a mountain, and there's a this, and it's like Rorschach, it's like, I see a sun, I see this, and she's like, this is the one I want to use, and I'm like, okay. Now, I don't want to be stereotypical, but most men would be like, thought you said you weren't creative, you goofy little thing, but it's like, you don't do that. So it's like to be able to see women go, oh my God, I built this. And it could be a small little lotus. It could be a bigger piece. It could just be cutting the first piece of glass and not slicing your finger off. But it's a very small scale, but it's a manageable scale for me. And when I am able to make a little bit of money, because it's not about the money. When you're an artist, it is so not about the money. You maintain, and to have that here in a place that a lot of my friends helped me build, and a lot of my friends gave me these. There's the 2 windows here came from when my mom was young, as a little kid. She lived at Landisville Camp Meeting Grounds, and these windows came out of the building that she grew up in. When we had driven her over there to check out what the place looked like, there were these 2 gay guys, gotta love it, who bought the building. It was like an old Victorian house, and they were replacing all the windows, and they were throwing these out. I'm like, what are you guys doing with the windows? You can have them. So I knew at some point I'd use it. So my mom lived long enough to see that her windows from the 1920s are here in this spot. So that's cool stuff. So that's kind of what this has afforded me. I do a lot. I'm writing a book, and so I come out here and I write a lot, and this table has never looked this nice. My friends are going to be like, what's the tablecloth doing? This is where I hammer and drill and break glass and renovate. I renovate old glass windows, some of the old leaded windows, and it gives me a space to be able to work on bigger installations. So,
what's your book about?
The
Secrets?
The book is it's kind of a women's study story. It has grown. I renovated an old boat that was in my family. It was an old rowboat that we used to go down in the summer and take this boat out to the sailboat, and every year you'd slap a coat of blue paint on this little dinky little rowboat. My uncle and aunt died in the 80s, and my mom and I drove down, and we took this boat that nobody wanted because it was busted, and so we stuck it on top of the car and drove it home. Years later, I decided to tear the whole thing apart and rebuild it and learn how to fiberglass and everything. And it's this beautiful mahogany rowboat. I find a dog tag under one of the seats from 1944 that nobody knows who this guy is. And I spend the next couple of years thinking who would have put it underneath there. And I'm like, Sandra Bullock would be the perfect character for this. In 1945.
I think I saw this on Facebook.
Oh, right, yeah. So it's like, she's going to be the person who's going to do it. So I end up having her do it. And then I keep going back in time. And so what ends up happening is the story is from 1904 to 2004. And it traces the two groups of 9-year-old girls. There's four 9-year-old girls in 1914, and there are 4 9-year-old girls in 1966. And both sets of girls take swim lessons. In the early 1900s, in 1904, it was illegal to swim. Illegal. You would be arrested if you swam as a woman. In 1904, there was a steamer ship that was ferrying 1,200 women and children from a congregation in New York City up the East River to go to a picnic grounds and have a day picnic. The boat catches on fire. One thing leads to another. The captain finally runs it aground 30 yards off the shore of Brother Island in the East River, and everybody jumps overboard. And 1,100 women and children drown because they can't swim. And at that point, the social outrage was like, okay, guess what? Now we learn how to swim. So it was this huge dividing thing between the old guard and the new guard. And so I knew that from another story of Gertrude Ederle, who was the first woman to swim the English Channel. She was my hero growing up, and I was a long-distance swimmer as a kid. So I've incorporated this book to be a women's study. It's more of a women's study book than I thought it was going to be, but it's how these different women impact each other's lives as kids and then continue through their lives. And the research that I found, it's just been, every time I think about an idea, it's kind of like, you guys, the story is already written. I'm finding it. Like my mom was a huge incentive for me to work on this book during the last 6 months of her life, because I moved from all these different time periods. I would take my laptop in when she was really, really sick, and I'd be like, flip it open, I'm like, where do you want to go now? And it would help her memory as well, and she'd be like, 1925, she's walking up the steps of the brownstone, she's getting ready to audition for the band. I'm like, great. And so I'd go back to that time period, and we'd work on it. And all these things that I found, like there were these women's bands in the 20s that I never knew existed. They were called the Parisian Redheads. They were a band out of Paris, Indiana, and they were fabulous women musicians. I would have never stumbled upon this had I not 10 years ago rebuilt this goofy little rowboat. So it's a women's study book, and it traces these the lives of these women. Some actually did live and some did not, and they intermingle and how they impact their lives, and it does kind of end up to be kind of an interesting question, because my lesbian friends say put lesbian characters in it because we need good I was just saying it earlier, it's like show me some good visibility of lesbian characters on TV and in literature, and yet here I am, I'm working on this book that I will get finished and I will publish it. I mean, I have no doubt that I will. It's already done. I just need to find it and figure out how to do it. But, do you hint at these women having an affair? And if you do, then does it automatically become, it's like the Women's Music Festival. Do you label it as a lesbian festival, and would you label that as a lesbian book? If there's even a hint of a scene where this one woman walks up to her friend who's painting a painting of what she sees, she puts her hand on her shoulder and she just gives her a kiss on her head. That's a sweet moment in the 30s of these two women having this weekend, and they won't see each other again. Does that make that a lesbian novel? Probably us in the room would say no, but maybe the grocery checkout woman who I go see every day, who asks me how my book is coming, if she were to read it, she'd be like, well, you didn't tell me there's going to be lesbians in it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a question that I still don't have the answer for.
And it's different perspectives, as you said, who's looking at it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where we started this,
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, exactly.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
That comes around. Are there other areas, anything else that you'd like to cover in this?
My
We've
God.
covered a lot.
We have so uncovered everything.
I bet you not everything.
Well, not everything.
But, you know.
I don't think so. I mean, I think that it's still this big question of, and I don't know if it's getting better or more polarizing, of how to make a gay and lesbian entity work as the truck drives past. It's my landlord, looking good. And I hope that it's a fabulous success, you know. And I think if we learn, I think this whole oral history project it's long overdue. Actually, you know what, when you say stuff like that, no, I'm going to take that back. It's like it's happening exactly when it's supposed to be happening.
Yeah, probably.
Timing is everything, and when you think, I should have done this sooner, it's like you weren't ready to do it sooner. You know, it's happening exactly when it's supposed to happen. So
it's just important to gather the stories now,
that's exactly it, because that's how we learn. And hopefully you get some of these youngsters who don't think that they need to learn anything. And, you know, because we were all kind of like that when we were younger.
Yeah,
but hopefully you can get them to go, oh my God, I didn't know that, blah, 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 and blah. I always thought that it was like this. And again, it's anything. It's any politically polarizing group, isn't it, when you think about it? You know, we just happen to be in this one, the coolest one. Any other areas that you have?
No? You think we covered it? All right. Well, thank you very much.
Oh my God, thank you.
Yay.
Yay, it's so good to
First one
reconnect
done.
with you. Yay.